Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my first of 4 quarterfinals overview and analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about our first quarterfinals matchup that just happened earlier in the day. Well, yesterday, I would say, for everybody watching this video, but the quarterfinals matchup between JD Gaming and Rogue. A really interesting matchup, mostly because it's the #1 team from the LPL taking on the West's final hope here at Worlds in 2022. So a lot of investment from a lot of different sides in this matchup. I, of course, previewed this matchup as well as every single other matchup in the quarterfinals in my preview video that went out yesterday. You can check that one out up in the iCard right now, and I really suggest that you do. It gives a lot of my thoughts and expectations going into this. I'm not going to do as much of that in this video, so if you want to see what I was expecting to see in this one, go check that video out. But let me know what you guys were expecting in this, and if it did or did not live up to expectations. Certainly this series was something, and I want to know how you guys felt about it down in the comment section below. So be sure to let me know. I know I've got a lot of Rogue fans in the comment section, so let me know how you guys felt about this series as a whole. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. If you guys have not been around on my channel for a lot of my playoff coverage, the way that I do this is I go game by game and talk about who did well, who didn't do well, adjustments I think teams can make, adjustments that I think teams cannot make, and I just kind of go through and kind of detail the series as a whole, talk about where the momentum shifts lie and where teams are succeeding. So strap in, we're going to be going over all 3 to 5 games that the series could potentially have here, and we're going to see who makes their way to the semifinals of the World Championships here. Who will be the first semifinalist? Of course, we have a matchup here between JD Gaming and Rogue, and Game 1 kicked us off with a JD Gaming win. Now, they were huge favorites going into the series for a lot of people, me included, but a lot of people saw this as potential for Rogue to be able to play through bot lane, because out of all of this tier 1, or the 1 seeds coming out of group stage, JD Gaming had the most, we'll say, inefficient bot lane throughout the year. While Hope and Missing are very strong, they're not often strong side for JD Gaming, and they're not often given a ton of resources in order to play out the early game. So Rogue felt like they had a little bit of an avenue to maybe be able to push that, and kind of compounding on that, they get basically everything they want in draft here. They get the Azir for Larson on red side on R1 because JD Gaming goes for that Graves pick ahead of it, and they're also able to grab the Lucian. Now, both of these have been incredibly crucial to Rogue's success over the course of the year. Larson's best champion is Azir by a country mile. I talked about this a ton in the LEC reviews. He never really picked up this meta of melee or shove and roam oriented mid laners. He's much more of a control mage player, somebody who does want to sit in lane and farm up to play those late game team fights. And then Comp and Trimby have always looked best on the Lucian Nami, even during the LEC. They brought it out a ton at Worlds so far, and it's really worked for them. So to see them be able to get both of these picks is great. Now, they had a couple different options that they ended up going for. They went for the Vi for potential easy access on the Aphelios on the backline. Certainly don't hate that decision. You can also guarantee CC on something like the Graves if it does get ahead. But they also go for this Renekton in the top lane. And I'm going to say this once, and I'm going to say it now. You're going to see 8,000 different comments on Twitter, on Reddit, on YouTube, wherever you go, about how awful this Renekton pick is, about how terrible and game-losing Renekton is for Odoamne. But I don't hate this pick. I really don't hate the concept of this pick. I really think it's important, and I think I tweeted this out as well, to separate pick ideology from the actual results of the game. And we'll get into it. Rogue had a lot of problems this game. I don't think Renekton was the biggest one by any stretch. For JD Gaming, I like their comp significantly more. They have a lot of late game pressure, which has always been JDG's mentality. While they do have decent early games, this is a team that always wants to play for team fights. They are, in my opinion, the single best team fighting team in the world. I've said that multiple times on this channel, and they certainly draft for that. Talia for Yagao here was a huge pick generally for JD Gaming throughout the year because it could allow him to move up into the top lane, make sure 369 is safe, or most of the time move with Kanavi to be able to make plays around the map, whether that's around Rift Herald, whether that's in the bot lane around Hope and Missing. Whatever they end up wanting to do there, Yagao and Kanavi are basically a pair in that jungle mid duo, and so to get Yagao and Talia, a very, very good matchup, I would say overall. Not great into Azir, but you can make it work, right? Like, you can make that situation work. And Kanavi gets his carry jungler. He is arguably the best jungler in the world. Give him something to be able to flex that on. He gets the Graves in this matchup. I love the B1 pick. Little bit risky giving over both the Azir and the Lucian Nami, but you trust yourself to be able to play that out. You know that your bot lane can play for this late game scaling with something that's a little bit more safe in lane, especially in the Aphelios' case when you pair it up with Lulu as a support that I have talked about on this channel. I expect to see her come back in a major way throughout the rest of this knockout stage and throughout the rest of the best of fives. We certainly saw the beginning of that here where JD Gaming goes for that Aphelios Lulu safe bot lane, and it allows Kanavi a lot of pressure to be able to create in the mid game because Yagao's entire attention is going to be directed to him, which I think is good overall. If Kanavi is given the opportunity to create, he is often going to do so, and man, did Kanavi have a great game. I mean, there is just nobody in the world that has jungle pathing like Kanavi. I know I talk about Peanut and Kanavi being the top two junglers that are kind of separated, I would say, from everybody else. Kanavi is even separated from Peanut, in my opinion, when it comes to his jungle pathing and his jungle IQ. He is so consistently able to generate leads in the early game, even on a champion like Graves, that theoretically should struggle into the matchup with Vi. He's able to 3-buff the Vi. He's able to make sure that she's basically got her entire lead in the early game taken away. Malrang, for his credit, actually does play this mid game really, really well. He understands that he's getting his camps taken away and that he's not really going to have a ton of pressure because the Azir isn't going to be able to match a ton with the Taliyah. And so he just goes for a ton of ganks. He actually gets one super successful gank off in the top lane to start the game on 369. His only death of the game, Ottawamne gets first blood. They do trade it, but it is just a solo kill for 369, and so that's overall super positive. He then tries to make a ton of plays elsewhere on the map. Just because those plays didn't go well doesn't mean that Malrang didn't play well, but at the end of the day, this really was the Kanavi show. He was basically flame horizoning Malrang in the jungle by 20 minutes, which is unbelievable. And if you give Graves that many resources, he's just simply unstoppable. He has so many ways to just take over the game basically by himself. And Rogue, for all of the compliments that I gave their draft strategy, because I think they have a lot of tools both to win the early game and to propel themselves into the late game. If you're going into that fed Graves, Lucian is going to be super susceptible to that. He's not really going to be able to step up and do any of his damage without Kanavi blowing him up. And the Azir can't really play all that aggressive either. He can't go for these miraculous Shuriman shuffles because he has to be afraid of dying in literally 3 auto attacks to Kanavi. And so just the pressure that the Graves was able to put on this game was really able to carry JDG across the finish line when it came to a lot of their macro decisions. Now, they weren't always perfect. They gave up a ton of dragons in this game, and that's a theme that we're going to see throughout the rest of the series, is that JDG very willing to give up dragons if it means getting herald pressure or just ward pressure in the game in general. They play towards topside so much that they're really not all that scared of losing the early game in the bot side in order to translate that lead elsewhere. And so really, really bold strategy. We're seeing a lot of teams start to readapt to that. We saw that a ton in 2020 and 2021. Not so much throughout the year of 2022. Dragons were buffed. They were made more important, but JDG still hanging on to one of those remnants of last year where they're saying, it's okay if we give up a ton of dragons if we're able to get pressure out of them, and they very much were in this game. Their lead was commanding, and they never really gave it up. A lot of that's due to the Graves. Kanavi, very clear player of the game. You've also got Yagao, who I think played really well on the Taliyah. This is a pick that I think is very dangerous to play into because it just gives Yagao everything he wants. He's got the ability to shove the wave really easily. He can play safe. He can shut down your Lucian and your Renekton really, really easily with the soiled ground, and so it makes teamfighting a lot more difficult from the enemy team, and it also gives him macro pressure, which is always going to be Yagao's biggest strength. So I love that pick. Hoping missing on something scaling in the bot lane. The Aphelios and the Lulu, they weren't super important in this game, but it was good to have them, and I think, thought process-wise, it's a good idea. And then 369 on the Gragas. It ends up working out. It's a good counter pick into Renekton, generally speaking. The Gragas wasn't super important in this game, despite what the scoreline would tell you. I think 369 definitely had some moments that were really, really solid. Towards the mid to late game, he really started to take over in that matchup against Renekton, but wasn't like the main carry presence or anything. This, to me, was a Kanavi show with Yagao as a little bit of a secondary piece. So overall, really good win for JDG. Unfortunate way to start off the series for Rogue. You kind of get everything you want. Like I say, Azir, Lucian, Nami, hell, even the Vi, I think, is relatively good for Malrang, and you're really not able to capitalize on it. This puts a lot of worry in me as an analyst here looking at Rogue because I'm not really sure how you adapt here. This is exactly your game plan. This is your style of playing. You just simply aren't able to execute it the same way that JDG is able to execute their style of play. I want to give a shout out to Comp. I actually think he played this game relatively okay. Was never really in a position to be blown up, but never really had a ton of opportunities to actually do damage. I think this Rogue team really needs to invest a ton into their bot side to make this work. Unfortunately for them, Kanavi really took over that side of the map, and it basically forced Malrang up to the top lane. He made a good adjustment, and he got Ottawamne a kill, but from that point onwards, Comp and Trimby really aren't going to have a ton of prio in that lane against the Aphelios because they have so much pressure on the bot side, JDG that is, and so really did kind of throw their plan into whack. And also, I gotta say it, Trimby just needs to position better. This was a bad game from Trimby. There is no way around it. He's my dad of the game. A lot of people want to give this to Odo. I don't think a lot of the problems in this game were Odo's fault. I understand Renekton going into Taliyah, not a great matchup, and you weren't able to dominate early, but even in that same facet, I think the Renekton pick could have been better had the bot lane matchup gone a tad bit better just in general, and so Trimby playing really, really bad stood out to me, I think, very much. I don't think he hit a bubble the whole game. Multiple times caught out, both in team fights, trying to make way too aggressive plays on a champion that can't really afford it, and then also just trying to get vision in general. Many, many times where Trimby was just isolated from the rest of the team and had no backup and just died alone. It's really egregious, and this is, a champion and a player combo that I think we've seen a lot throughout the year. Trimby, it's not like he's played no Nami, so to see him be really, really lackluster on the champion, I think was definitely very disappointing, but certainly some avenues to get back. If you have even a remotely better early game from Malrang, ideally you're going to be able to make this game a tad bit easier, perhaps maybe switching up that top lane to a tank pick just to be able to scale a tad bit better, but Larson on Azir, comp on Lucian, that's what I want to see. This is the direction I want to see the team continue to go in. Maybe just fix up the surrounding pieces to make it work a tad bit better. But for JD Gaming, I mean, really right now, I hate to say it, but it feels like you're limit testing. You have the Graves, you have the Taliyah, you've got the Aphelios. This is super late game. You really shouldn't be able to have such a strong early game, and yet you were able to do it anyways because you're just simply the better team. I would expect them to continue to go this route. If they go for a more early game style, it could perhaps be a little bit more deadly in the early game, but you do lose a little bit of that safety that you get drafting something like a Graves Aphelios combo where once you get to those team fights, they are going to be difficult to take down. So it'll be interesting to see if either team really evolves their draft all that much, but Rogue especially, I think, is going to go even more to bread and butter than they did in this game. But that's really all it is for Game 1. Game 2 is really where we're going to see how this series shakes up. As everybody knows who watches this channel, Game 2, to me, the most important game of the series. It really dictates the tempo. Is a team going to be able to match, or are you going to be able to generate a 2-0 lead on the side of JD Gaming? 2-0 leads are a death sentence in most playoff cases, and so it's going to be very, very important for Rogue to be able to at least be competitive in this game number 2 to maintain some momentum. But are they able to do that, or is JD Gaming going to put themselves in a really strong position to take Rogue down? Well, the winner of game number 2 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 2 and go up a commanding 2-0 in this series to start it off. It's definitely not looking good for the West's final hope here in Rogue, but let's go ahead and talk about the two drafts. I get it from both sides. I really, really do. A lot of people are going to be pissed again at Rogue's draft, but honestly, I like this draft more than the first one. I think generally speaking for Rogue, because not only do you still get Azir, do you still get Lucian Nami, which has been your Exodia over the course of the year, but you accentuate it with the things that have really been working. You're able to get Maokai on blue side this time with first pick, and you're able to complement Malrang's early game aggression playstyle with something like a Lee Sin that has a lot more agency, just generally speaking, in the game, even if you are down jungle camps. And so, generally, I like this comp more for Rogue. I know a lot of people are really shitting on it, but I still like it. Again, I think adapting to something you haven't played all year long in the quarterfinals is more difficult than adapting to your perfect comp, essentially. I mean, Jarvan replacing the Lee Sin would make this the perfect comp, but even though Lee Sin, it's not like Malrang doesn't play Lee Sin, so it's certainly a good comp overall for Rogue. JDG's is just a great answer, I would say. You go back to that Aphelios Lulu, still going to be that more long-range, scaling-oriented bot lane. Doesn't need to win early, but also doesn't lose early because it's Aphelios, and so he does a lot of damage. Kanavi on something like Viego that can really take over the game because the Graves is now perma-gone, and it will be for the rest of the series, I assume. Yigao's still on this more shove and roam oriented mid laner, this time with a tad bit more agency on the side of the Sylas. I think Sylas is just generally stronger than Taliyah, but he does accomplish very similar things where he can really make it difficult to be able to play into him if he is being super proactive. And then you just pick Gwen on the top side because it's a tank counter. It beats Maokai 1v1, so sure, why not? It doesn't really synergize at all with the comp, but it doesn't really matter. It's 3-6-9 on a matchup that he super wins in lane, and so yeah, I mean, it's still good for JD Gaming, gives them a lot of the things they want, but I think cohesively, Rogue makes a lot of sense here. Unfortunately for them, they're just not that good. Like, they're just not good enough on this level, and I have to feel bad for him at a certain point because it's not like they're really playing all that dumb. They're just not at the same level. They make a ton of little errors, and that just creates a huge, huge problem for them overall as a team. Gotta give a ton of credit to JDG's bot lane. I was talking about the top side in game number 1, most notably Kanavi, who had a really, really good game on the Graves. It really transitioned into the bot lane for them to be able to generate that lead in this game. Playing the Aphelios Lulu into Lucian Nami, you don't really expect a ton of 2v2 dominance, especially because you just assume that Malrang on Lee Sin is going to be bot lane all the time with a Maokai in the top lane and with a Zero in the mid lane. Where else is Lee Sin really going to go to get consistent kills? But Malrang plays the early game significantly too slow. Hope and Missing are actually able to generate a really solid lead in that bot lane, and Kanavi only exacerbates the issue by going bot. It makes it so this Aphelios is basically unkillable by the end of the game. Hope is going to get my player of the game for that. This is a team that I was worried about not being able to play through bot, but even against a very bot-centric team like Rogue is, there's just nothing that they can do because they're just getting outplayed by both jungle and bot lane. It truly is just a player diff, in my opinion. Hope was really good. He knows exactly how to play Aphelios lanes. This was a champion that he was incredibly successful on. I remember back in spring when he subbed in, and even throughout summer, obviously, Aphelios was a big pick for JDG overall. Pairing that with the Lulu, I think, is really unlocking the best of Aphelios. I expect to see this pairing a ton throughout knockout stage. I talked about it going into the tournament. Aphelios Lulu very much felt to me like the best bot lane in the game. Now, you can say that is or isn't true. Yuumi Sivir is incredibly strong. Caitlyn plus Luxor Morgana is really strong. Even the Lucian Nami, I think, in the right hands could be really strong. But Aphelios and Lulu definitely deserve to be in that conversation for me. And this is just how you pilot it at a master degree, right? Is that the Aphelios can still have a ton of pressure in the early game because the range that he gets from Green Gun and the sustain that he gets from Red Gun means that your 1 to 3 is actually incredibly difficult to break through. Comp and Trimby learned that the hard way, where it's really difficult to actually trade into Aphelios, especially when he's got all these shields. And then if he is able to generate that lead, it makes it very easy for him to clear wave and just be able to push you in and have a ton of bot lane pressure. Then if you ever do bring jungle down, it's a really free gank because of the CC setup that Aphelios offers basically by himself, and the amount of damage that you have with the Viego here. It's just incredibly free overall. Great game from Hope, great game from Missing. They both played their roles expertly in this game and really led to JDG's victory. Kanavi had another great one. He just continues to have great games over and over and over again. I mean, it's Kanavi. What do you really want me to say? He gets to play Viego in this one. He gets to have a lot of fun in the late game. Really wasn't all that dominant in the early game, but still completely out-jungled Malrang. It feels like he's reading him like a book as this series goes on. And that's really just what a top jungler Kanavi is. He's the most tactical, methodical jungler in the game right now, and he continues to do it every single game. No matter who he's playing against, no matter what the matchup is, he will win the game for his team, and it won't even be all that close. A lot of people are criticizing the Sylas pick, leaving the Azir open with the priority that we've seen on Azir throughout the tournament. I really like this for JD Gaming. They've always done better with these more shove and roam rather than mid-focused mid laners. Azir is a mid-lane focused mid laner. He doesn't really want to be making a lot of these trades in the early game. Not a champion that really wants to be pushing out with his jungler to be able to make plays either top or bot lane, and I think Sylas does want to do that. He is very successful at these random skirmishes around 10 minutes, and I think that's just what Yegal wants to do. If JDG don't want to play Azir, I think that's absolutely fine. He's not broken enough where I feel like they have to adapt to it. He's just strong enough where he's a good pick, but not strong enough where I feel like if JDG don't pick him, then they're absolutely trolling. And so for them to go Sylas, and especially with Sylas being so strong, I think you could make a real case that Sylas is even just a better pick than Azir in the meta right now, especially for JDG, that I'm really not all that concerned. The only problem I had in this game was 369 in points. He looked like mentally checked out. Like he was having fun up there. Not in a bad way. He didn't look bored. He looked like he was just like griefing at points. Dying to random ganks because he has no vision, teleporting into Baron, and then immediately getting knocked up. Like just weird plays that if it was a close game, it would have mattered, but just generally speaking, I mean, very, very odd. Like leaving his own W in order to get CC'd. Just a lot of weird shit going on from 369 this game, but it's fine. His team was super far ahead, and it really didn't matter at that point, and so they were able to pick up the win. But on the side of Rogue, definitely frustrating. You definitely have to adapt at this point. I mean, if this comp isn't going to work in this form with Maokai, Azir, Lucian, and Nami, I mean, that is about every strong pick in the meta that you could possibly ask for on the side of Rogue, and you still kind of got run over in this game. You still had Dragon Prio because that's just what JDG wants to give up early, but you weren't even really willing to fight over that in the late game. You certainly weren't willing to fight over Baron, where you basically leave Odo to die and then take a 4v5 in the mid lane. Like, I just don't understand what the macro play is here. They look completely burnt out. They look completely done, and that's got to be frustrating to see. Hopefully, they can have some mental resilience and bounce back here for a game 3, but it just looks like they're getting outplayed, and they know it. They can feel it, and so it just doesn't seem like they have a lot of life in them. Trimby's going to get my dud of the game again here, games 1 and game 2. Again, man, if he's not going to hit a bubble or an ultimate, like, I don't think you can pick the Nami anymore. The Lucian Nami's got to be out. And you got to be able to pivot to something that's maybe a little bit easier to use. I know Rogue didn't go to a ton of engagers this year, but maybe something like the Leona or the Nautilus or something that's a little bit more straightforward in the usage could be good. We know Trimby can pull out the Soraka. I don't think that's an awful situation for him right now, but just generally, I think Lucian Nami has proven to be not what you need in this matchup, and so maybe pivoting out of that, even though it's been great for you all year, might be the right idea. I still think keeping Larson on Azir or Odo on Maokai or whatever is a great idea. Even Malrang on Lee Sin. Just give Malrang anything you can win the early game with. In my preview, I talked about when Malrang loses, he loses, And unfortunately, going into Kanavi, this is only going to get worse. And so he has to have some level of early game impact, or else I think he's just going to lose the game on his own. So a lot of things for Rogue that I think they can adapt and try to overcome with, but again, two really, really devastatingly not good games and not close games, quite frankly, that they're really going to have to rebound and just fix their mental from. But for JDG, it feels like you're cruising to a 3-0 as long as you don't change anything up. You should be able to take this third and final game and move into the semifinals like everyone expects. I really like the way that they're drafting. I just think they need to be able to not overextend. 369 certainly showed some signs of being a little bit too excited in this game, and hopefully they can calm him down, make sure that he can get to the point where he's still going to be good for the rest of the games here. But let's see if they're going to be able to do that. Can Rogue pull out a big win here over JDG and really, at least show like we're not pushovers on this stage? Or is JDG just going to make this a very quick 3-0 and send the Western fans home unhappy? Well, the winner of game number 3 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 3 and make this a pretty quick sweep, quite frankly. This game 3 did last a bit longer than the game 1 and game 2. I think game 1 was 28 minutes and game 2 was 29 minutes, but JDG really not making us wait too long for the end of the day. Really courteous of them to make sure that EU fans get to go to bed on time, but unfortunately, we have to talk about this game from the side of Rogue. They actually had a few advantages in this one. They do uproot their strategy a tad bit. They stick to a lot of the things that they've been, practicing with and really working with over the course of the tournament. Otoamne on the Maokai, definitely understand that. An incredibly strong champion, and he's really been working well with it, I would say, over the course of the tournament. Obviously not perfect, but a lot of good games on Maokai. I definitely understand going to that. Malrang on the Lee Sin, you continue to want that early game pressure. It's something that I actively said I did not want them to drop. I did not want them to drop the early game pressure in the jungle to try and create it elsewhere. If Lee Sin is your pick, then Lee Sin is your pick. Larson goes to a little bit of a different thing here. We talk about him as a control mage player. He brings out the LeBlanc here. Now, I hate being the guy that, talks down, on players, because I hate being the negative force in the scene, but I do want to say this about Larson. We see a lot of comments, especially after how good this game was on his LeBlanc, which we'll get into, that, where are all the people who were saying Larson was a control mage player now? Well, I do need to say just a tad bit that my problem with Larson has never really been after 15 to 20 minutes into the game. I think he's a phenomenal team fighter. I think he's really smart, whether he's on control mages or assassins. I think he's really, really good at being able to group up with this team and making the right play, being able to expand in a lot of these backline team fights or dive into the backline and create the play that he needs to on a pick like Azir or on a pick like LeBlanc. He's able to make a lot of these flash plays. My problem with Larson, and the reason I consider him better on these control mages, is that I don't think he has this, killer instinct in the first 10 minutes of the game like a lot of other, assassin-oriented mid laners do. He's not someone that's going to want to leave lane a ton. He's really not someone that's going to be looking for a ton of picks, and that's where I think picks like Akali or Silas or even something like LeBlanc to an extent, but I still think LeBlanc is more control mage than she is assassin. I think that's where those picks kind of thrive, and that's why I've never really recommended Larson beyond those, over his more standard picks. But yeah, can he play this after 15 minutes? 100%. And the game here was really good. He actually had a great pre-15 minutes as well, so maybe I'm just talking out my own ass. This is just my experience with Larson. You got Comp and Trimby on the Kalista Soraka. This is something they went to incredibly consistently, obviously, over the course of the LEC playoffs. Obviously, in LEC finals, this was huge for them. I understand going back to it now. Soraka, I think, generally as a pick is just going to give you more of a baseline than something like Nami is, and Kalista hopefully can give you a shot to win lane, and actually, Rogue does that. Larson does a really good job in the mid lane to be able to generate his own lead, and he's actually super effective towards the mid part of this game where he's able to generate kill after kill after kill in a lot of these trades, mostly because Hope is gloriously out of position on the Lucian pretty much all the time, and so definitely something to point out there. But Comp and Trimby actually do a really good job in the early game. Comp actually gets really strong in this game on the Kalista, and in most cases, I would say Rogue was in a pretty good spot. Unfortunately, they're playing in a JD Gaming, so it doesn't really matter. First of all, JDG never really goes down in gold, even though Rogue is having a pretty decent early game. Second of all, even if they were down in gold, JDG is known as the team that gold deficits don't matter against, because their team fighting is just simply better than everybody else that they're going to be playing against, and that kind of came to fruition again here. It wasn't only the fact that Hope and Missing lost bot lane, which it happens. Lucian Nami not looking all that strong in this series overall, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I still don't think that pick is bad by any stretch of the imagination. And it's not like Yigao or Kanavi lost. Yeah, Larson got really strong, and Kanavi certainly won the jungle matchup. I'll get into that in a bit, but this game was really about the top laners, and you wouldn't really expect to say that in an Ornn Maokai matchup. And I know generally speaking, there are going to be a lot of top laner players in my comment section that are like, Ornn destroys Maokai. Maokai, it's literally unplayable, you know, etc., etc. I definitely understand that, and I understand that for solo queue. Generally speaking in pro, you're not going to get a huge advantage in this lane. Maokai is going to lose, but it's not going to be by all that much, right? And they're both still going to be useful in the late game. The difference is that 369 plays like an absolute madman this entire game on the Ornn. He is constantly pressuring Maokai. He's not looking to farm. He's not caring about the enemy jungle. He's really just trying to play aggro. This was something he was doing in the previous game on the Gwen into the Maokai, and he kind of picked that up again on the Ornn. This is something that I think could be incredibly punishable by a good team, but Malrang just not in position to really ever be able to take advantage of this Ornn. Kanavi also doing a really good job of being able to shadow 369, making sure that he's in a good spot throughout the entirety of this game, and this Ornn runs through Maokai. I mean, Maokai is a dominant pick in the meta, and Ornn's a good tank, in my opinion, one of the best in the game, but I mean, this was like a demolition. One was useful and one was absolutely not. I'm talking 1v1 demolition for 369. He was up like 50 CS. You know, obviously was dominating in any of the trades. Like, it was a massacre in the top lane. 369's gonna get my player of the game for that. This is what happens when 369 gets a lead. This is why he's so scary to play into, because even when he plays a tad bit reckless like he did in this series, the team knows to be able to play around him, and he has the skill to be able to beat anybody in any matchup, no matter who they are. Like, he could beat Zeus in a losing matchup. He's that good of a player in lane, and so just give him the keys and he will drive, and he definitely drove this game. He was really, really scary in that Ornn in the top lane, but gotta give a big shout out to Kanavi as well. He just dominated this series overall. It was Kanavi versus Malrang for a lot of these early games, and Kanavi just decimated him in all 3 games. I don't want to talk bad about Malrang just generally, because I think he did try his best, but like, this is what happens when you see like a good jungler go up against like one of the best junglers in the world, right? Like, Malrang's a good jungler. He's gonna be one of the best junglers in the LEC, but Kanavi's a different breed. Like, going up against Kanavi is a completely different story, and he showed that multiple times in this game. Malrang was just simply not where he needed to be. He was clearly flustered, and he was even missing a ton of skill shots, a ton of Qs towards the back half of the game that really could have been influential, but just generally speaking, he very much seemed off his game and tilted by this point, and that's because I think picking Lee Sin, and then Vi in game number 1, especially into something like the Graves in game 1, like, you should be setting the pace, you should be setting the tempo, and he's just not able to do it because Kanavi is just too good at what he does. So big shout out to Kanavi. What a phenomenal series from him. Yigao was good, wasn't really able to stop Larson, but you don't really need to. You've got a ton of fantastic ultimates to steal on Sylas in this game. Obviously, Sylas into Maokai is huge for the Sylas just in general to be able to match with those ultimates. It's always great, but even he didn't really have to match Larson in this game. Larson was going to be able to pick and choose one target on the enemy team to blow up, and unfortunately for him, look at the comp of JDG. It can never actually be the people that matter. He can blow up Hope, and he did blow up Hope multiple times in this game, but what is your answer to Ornn? What is your answer to Viego? Because you don't really have one. LeBlanc doesn't answer that. Kalista doesn't really answer that unless you give her a ton of time, which theoretically you could do with Maokai and Lee Sin, but the fact that they were so far behind made it so much more difficult, and so, generally speaking, I felt like this game was always going to be difficult for Rogue to win, even if they were able to generate a lead, and so, for JDG, they really just played it out exactly as they needed to. They got to that late game, even without a perfect early game on the side of their bot lane, and they were able to produce. Yes, I wanted to see more out of Hope and Missing. This is where I started to get a little bit concerned, because I did say that Comp was better than Hope as a player going into the series. I'm not sure if I stick with that statement. I certainly am not going to disagree with it, because I don't think Comp played bad in the series. In my opinion, he was clearly probably the second best player on Rogue behind Larson throughout the rest of the series, but he was winning lane. Like, he won on Kalista into Hope and Missing as Kalista in Illusion, which I think generally speaking could theoretically go either way. I know a lot of people are going to say it's Kalista favored, but I think generally it could go either way, and I think Comp just played it better. Trimby had his best game of the series by far. He just wasn't wildly out of position almost every single fight in this one. It's not to say he was perfect, but he just wasn't awful like he was in a lot of these games, and so hard to criticize him. But for Hope and Missing, I really do think they're going to have to level up if they are going to be a team that wants to make finals. Now, we've seen a lot of teams be able to play around weaknesses like that in the past. I'm not saying Hope and Missing are bad players, but I just need to see them be world-class players. We're not at the time where you can be a top 15 player in your role in the world anymore. You have to be a top 10, top 5 player in your role to be able to be an impact player at this level, and so that's the expectation that I'm setting for a player like Hope, and I'm really, really hoping that he's able to hit it. But for Rogue, that's going to be the end of their tournament. It's definitely a sad end, and for EU, it's definitely a sad way to go out. It means the EU doesn't win a single best of 5 all year long. Obviously not at MSI. They didn't even beat NA in play-ins, and they're not able to beat JDG here. Definitely not the way that you want to go out at this tournament, not winning a game or anything like that, but It could be worse. Theoretically, it could be worse, right? You got matched up against one of the best teams in the tournament. Yes, a decent matchup for you, like, player-wise, but generally speaking, talent-wise, it's just not something you were expected to be able to overcome. And you were still the only Western team to make it out of groups, so you can solidify yourself as the best Western team at this tournament. There are a lot of things that I think this team wants to talk about as takeaways. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this roster next year with Rogue turning into Koi and how that's going to play out just generally, but I think Rogue should be proud of the season that they had. I know they're not going to be happy that they went out in quarters, especially without winning a game, but I think generally speaking, this is a win for a team like Rogue to be able to build a roster that can make the quarterfinals of Worlds. This isn't G2, this isn't Fnatic, this isn't one of the biggest budget orgs in the region. This is a team that in their first split went 0-18, so we just got to keep it in context. Rogue making the quarterfinals was a huge win for them, and I think they showed a lot of good things. Hopefully the players don't get tilted and can come back next year just as strong. But on the side of JD Gaming, this means you are now locked in the semifinals. You're going to be playing the winner of tomorrow, or I guess today's series in T1 versus RNG, and that's going to be a super fun one to watch. You're not really going to have a great matchup against either team, or at least a perfect matchup against either team, but JDG should be walking out of this with as much momentum as they could possibly have. Not only did they win, they won on comps that they were really limit testing on. Even when their bot lane wasn't getting ahead, they were still able to dominate these games because of the skill difference and the team fighting difference. This is exactly what you wanted to see out of JD Gaming just generally in this series, and honestly, I think just going into that next series, they're probably going to be favored against whoever they play, no matter who it is. I mean, unless something crazy happens today, I expect this team to be a heavy favorite to be ending up in the World Finals. Alright, well that is going to do it for my first quarterfinals overview and analysis. JDG versus Rogue is in the bag. Up today, as you guys are watching this, we have T1 versus RNG, an incredibly fun one. Like I said earlier in the video, you can check out the iCard if you want to see how I preview that episode and that matchup. And if you're excited for it, let me know down in the comment section below. Of course, let me know how you felt about this series as a whole down there, and let me know what you think of JDG moving forward in the tournament. Of course, while you're down there, if you made it through this video, hit the like button. It means you probably enjoyed it if you made it through 30 minutes of me talking about League. Go ahead and hit that like button. It really does let me know that you guys are enjoying the content that's getting put out on this channel for Worlds. You guys have been killing it with comments and likes recently, and I'm super appreciative of that. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be putting out content like this for every single quarterfinals, semifinals, and World Finals matchup throughout the rest of this tournament. And of course, we've got off-season coming up. A lot of good content coming you guys' way in that case. So if you're new and you enjoy what I do here, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so you can see when these videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.